There's one simple thing I did to become fluent in 3 languages. And no matter what language you're learning, what level you're at, or how comfortable you are speaking in front of other people, you can use it to sound more native too. I'm going to tell you what that is and how you can apply it right away. Along the way, we'll also learn about a new useful framework, where you're at on this learning chart, how to reach peak learning status, and how you can use the brain's daring effect and hypercorrection effect to reach fluency faster. Hi, I'm Alan Park, and I've learned Chinese and Japanese to fluency despite starting after becoming an adult. I'm Korean American, by the way. I've done 3 of the most intense language immersion programs, and after almost becoming a lawyer, I got good enough to use those languages in high-stakes business meetings as a management consultant for large companies in China, Japan, and Korea. People often thought I was a native speaker. Since 2011, my mission has been to help people learn languages. But let's start with one of my most embarrassing moments. A long time ago, I interned at a Japanese broadcasting station called Hokuriku Hoso in Kanazawa. I got to see the behind-the-scenes operations. But the best part was that I was really immersed in Japanese. I was the only American there. So I chatted everyone up and soaked in as many new words, phrases, mannerisms as I could. I wanted to blend in like a chameleon, but it didn't always work so well. In the elevator, I would hear people say, "Otsukaresama deshita," which basically means, "Thank you for your hard work." So I started saying it too. But then I heard some people say something else. "Gokurou-sama deshita." I looked it up. It seemed to mean exactly the same thing. So I started saying it instead. I probably said it to 10 more people until finally somebody pulled me over and said, "You probably don't want to be saying that." I'd been making a big mistake. In Japanese culture, language is deeply tied to social hierarchy and respect. The phrase "gokurou-sama deshita" is something you'd say to someone who works under you, maybe a junior colleague or someone younger. It turns out that I was talking down to people much older than me. So did they fire me? No, they said,
"Park-san, 面白い人ですね."
"Park-san, you're an interesting guy." We had a good laugh, and I got a funny memory out of it. But you can bet I'll never forget the meaning of "gokurou-sama deshita." So what is the bigger lesson from this? The lesson I took from it was that the best way to learn is by making mistakes. But it's not just about making more mistakes. It's about making mistakes in the right way and learning from them. But hold up, is it as simple as just making more mistakes? Should we just go out there, make fools of ourselves, and expect to learn faster? Not exactly. Let's take a look at a higher stakes situation, heart surgery. Now stay with me. I promise heart surgeons and language learners have a huge thing in common. For heart surgeons, mistakes mean someone dies. So what do you think happens after a heart surgeon loses a patient? Do you think the surgeon gets better or worse? Earlier this year, researchers at Carnegie Mellon and Clark University looked at this question. At first, losing a patient improves performance. This continues even after they lose more patients. But after losing 1 too many patients, they stop getting better. It peaks. After that, the surgeons get worse. Here's what one surgeon said about repeated failures. "I would feel so frustrated. I would seriously doubt whether I deserve to be a surgeon. A few negative events could be learning opportunities. But if it happens more than that, I don't think I qualify." What about the best surgeons? The ones with elite training or specializations? The ones who might have a higher ability to learn? They were more resilient. In other words, they were able to be okay even after losing more patients. But like the others, the better learner surgeons also peaked and then declined. Why? At first, failure creates opportunities for learning. Confidence and motivation are high. Let's call this first group pre-peak. I made up this word, by the way. It wasn't used in the study. Then there's a point where more failures creates more opportunities for learning, but motivation is still high. Let's call this second group peak. But as the failures pile up, motivation declines. Surgeons question whether they're cut out for the work, or they try to make themselves feel better by blaming external factors, or by lowering their standards. This last group is post-peak. All right, so what does all this talk about mistakes actually mean if you want to improve as a language learner? Well, the same pre-peak to post-peak scale that we applied to heart surgeons can also be applied to you as a language learner as well. Are you making a lot of mistakes but still feeling motivated to learn? Then you're at the peak. That's great because you're in the sweet spot. You're maximizing your learning. Or are you making very few mistakes now and feeling pretty good about yourself? Then you're pre-peak. Don't get too comfortable because you're down here. You're not getting enough information to improve. Or are you making so many mistakes that you're starting to question whether you're cut out for language learning? Then you're post-peak. What you're doing might be too intense for you. If your goal is to be as fluent as possible, then keep listening to find out how you can shift gears to reach peak learning. By the way, if you're finding this video useful, check out my podcast and email newsletter in the description, where I'll share more tips that you won't find on YouTube. Let's say you're feeling pre-peak. You don't feel anxious or discouraged. You're in your comfort zone. You could be pushing yourself more, and you'd like to improve faster. My tips. First, realize that not making mistakes is actually slowing you down. Remember the heart surgeons from earlier. Mistakes equal progress. Seek out unfamiliar situations and contexts. It's easy to feel comfortable when you're at home. Example, I'm willing to bet that you're comfortable talking about learning Spanish or French or whatever language you're learning. But are you comfortable talking about Spanish literature, Spanish politics? Can you diagnose a patient in Spanish? Realize that you're probably making more mistakes than you think. You just don't know it. At this point, people might compliment you a lot on your language ability, which is great, except that you end up making mistakes without knowing you are. The mistakes you make probably won't be complete fails, but they'll be slightly awkward phrasings or mispronunciations, which makes your message a little less fluent. People don't point those things out because it's not socially appropriate to do so. Let people know that you're seeking feedback about mistakes. The way to get more feedback is to tell people you want it. If you're working with a tutor or native speaker, make it clear that you want to be corrected. If you have higher goals, then it's good to go to an extreme with this. The fluency is in the details. When I was learning Chinese in college, I wanted my tones and pronunciation to be perfect. After I reached the point of good enough, it got difficult to improve more than that. I had to ask my teachers 4 or 5 times before they'd actually point out something I did wrong. It was exhausting, but totally worth it. Be relentless about getting corrections, especially when something feels off as soon as it comes out of your mouth. You know that feeling, don't ignore it. Consider using a different kind of language app, which lets you do the work that you need to in order to learn. Collect your mistakes. For you, mistakes are rare and valuable. Think of it like panning for gold. Collect them. Don't let a good mistake go to waste. After you make a mistake, put it somewhere. For example, a notebook or an app where you can put all such words. Prioritize active recall. It's hard to overdo it. There was a study in the Journal of Experimental Psychology that tested exactly this. They split participants into 2 groups. One group was shown the questions and answers at the same time, so they weren't answering questions. The other group had to guess the answer first before seeing the correct one. But here's the twist. The questions were either super difficult or completely made up, so the second group had no chance of answering correctly. They were forced to make mistakes. After a break, both groups were tested on the same questions. And guess what? The group that made mistakes did better than the group that didn't, even though the questions and answers were all completely made up. This was in all 6 experiments. So use learning methods that challenge you to produce the words and phrases. Just consuming is not enough. But even active recall isn't enough. Use the daring effect. In a study in the Journal of Educational Psychology, participants were asked to review a scientific text in one of 3 ways: copying and underlining, creating a concept map, or daring, writing the wrong information on purpose and then correcting it. So daring, deliberate erring, getting it wrong on purpose. Get it? Later, they read a news article on the same topic, and then they wrote a response based on what they had learned. The result: people who were told to make mistakes on purpose remembered the material better and were better at applying what they'd learned to new situations. So, making mistakes is effective even if you don't know the right answer. Don't speed through mistakes. Slow equals fast. In our quest to learn, it's easy to mistake efficiency for effectiveness. Let's take a look at Asians and math. In 1994, researchers videotaped math classrooms in the US, Japan, Taiwan, and China. and they found something really interesting. In the US, math lessons are all about following the correct steps. Teachers show you exactly how to solve a problem, and students practice doing it the right way. If a student makes a mistake, it's often just ignored or brushed off. The focus is all about getting the right answer and avoiding mistakes. But in Japan, it's totally different. Teachers expect students to struggle with problems, make mistakes, and get things wrong. Instead of giving them all the answers up front, Japanese students are asked to figure things out on their own. After the students have struggled, the teacher comes in and leads a big class discussion where they dive deep into the mistakes. They talk about why the mistakes happened, why they seemed like they might be correct, and how to fix them. In Japan, they don't move past mistakes, they dig into them. The goal is for students to understand not just what the right answer is, but why they first thought it was wrong and how they can improve their thinking. This approach helps students build a much deeper understanding of the material. So don't speed through mistakes. Take the time to reflect on what went wrong and figure out why. Take advantage of the hypercorrection effect. There's a fascinating phenomenon. It works like this. When you're really confident about an answer, but it turns out to be wrong, your brain gets hit with a much bigger surprise. And when that happens, your brain pays extra attention to what you got wrong. So say everything with confidence. When you're wrong, you'll improve faster. Force yourself to say things in a different way. Don't just stick to the words and phrases you're already comfortable with. It's easy to play it safe and keep using what you know, but that's not how you grow. Challenge yourself to use new words, grammar, and phrases. Always use the risky word that you might get wrong. The new word might not fit perfectly at first. You'll bump into its limits, but that's when you learn the most. Studies also suggest that ESL learners who take risks learn faster. Review at the right time. Everyone forgets. That's why we review. But did you know there's an optimal time to review to remember things more easily? It's called spaced repetition. Use a tool that makes it easy to review mistakes with spaced repetition so you can get the words to stick. After trying all these things, you should reach the peak. So let's say now you feel like you're at the peak. You're making mistakes, but still motivated. So you're in the sweet spot. Congrats, but not so fast. Let's be real here. You might think you're at the peak, but are you sure? Maybe you're actually pre-peak. Maybe there's more left in the tank. Maybe you're capable of more. My personal fastest periods of growth came when I tested my limits. In college, I did the infamous Duke Study in China and Princeton in Beijing programs. They make you take an oath to only speak Chinese during the program. I took it to an extreme. For 2 months, I breathed, ate, slept Chinese. I only listened to Chinese music.
想要飞，却怎么样也飞不高。想要
Even if I had trouble finding something I liked. I stopped contacting home. I didn't talk to any students who took the oath less seriously. After I came out of the program, I felt like I had forgotten how to speak English. I had to relearn how to say the word shrimp. The only way to know whether you're at the peak is to test your limits. For example, maybe it's a good time to try more challenging resources like full-length movies and TV shows. You can always pull back if you feel yourself burning out. Now let's say you're feeling post-peak. Your progress has slowed down and you're discouraged. First, congratulations. You're working harder and you're improving faster too, even though it might not feel that way. So here's what I'd suggest, based on the science and what's worked for me. Think of mistakes as unlocking a superpower. There's a special kind of brain activity when we make a mistake, error-related negativity, or ERN. Interestingly, it happens right when we make the mistake, as if we know the mistake before it happens. After you make a mistake, you end up responding more slowly in the next round, maybe because your brain is trying to avoid making the same mistake. Students with higher ERN seem to have better grades, but it seems ERN can also be correlated with higher anxiety, so it's not necessarily a good thing. ERN takes time to develop, so adults have a higher ERN than children. So why do we have an ERN? I'm not a scientist. I barely passed physics. But here's my armchair speculation. For our ancestors, a mistake could often lead to death, like eating the wrong berries. So maybe the ERN emerged as a survival mechanism? This would help explain why mistakes are so effective for learning. It triggers this ERN, which tells the brain you'd better pay attention. Maybe it's like a superpower, like a language learning spidey sense. Lower the stakes. The key here is to learn in a way that takes advantage of your brain's ERN without making you lose confidence. You already know what stresses you out. If I had to draw it out for me, it would be something like this. Consuming content is less stressful than an app. An app is less stressful than a live one-on-one class. A live one-on-one class is less stressful than a live group class. Switch to a way of learning that's less stressful for you. Learn with content you enjoy. Whether it's watching your favorite TV shows and movies, reading an engaging novel, or listening to music, make sure the content you're learning from is something you genuinely enjoy. When learning feels fun, you're more likely to stick with it and improve. Find a tool that has a curated library of content so that you can easily find content that matches your level. If you're a beginner, jumping into native content might be too much. For example, would you start learning Chinese with this? One good way is to use a tool which has a curated library. Then you get the best of both worlds, engaging authentic content which matches your level. Use a lot of scaffolding in your learning. Scaffolding is like training wheels. It brings content within reach even if it's too difficult for you. Use a tool that gives you the support you need to learn with fun content successfully. Remember that mistakes equal progress. It's not a rationalization. This is not some woo-woo positive thinking nonsense. I'm not just trying to make you feel better. As we saw, mistakes are the fastest way to improve. As the wise woman Oprah once said, things happen for you, not to you. Don't compare yourself to other people. Everyone is on their own journey. You don't know what their struggles are or what they've been through to get to where they are. Focus on your own path. So now we know how to learn faster through mistakes. But there's more to learning a language than mistakes. Like vocab. You need to be able to learn new words quickly. Watch this next video where I share my top tips for making vocab stick.